All right, thanks everyone. My name is Kelly Smith. I'm a product manager on the backup and recovery solutions team. I turned on my camera so I could say hello to everyone, but I'll turn it off in respect for everyone's bandwidth and as we go through the presentation. Today we're going to talk about retention locking for your cloud database backups, and that's going to increase your ransomware protection. This is a new feature that's coming in the recovery service, so we'll talk about that. And the other things that we're going to touch on is the sessions and hands-on labs that are going to be available at CloudWorld, so that you can, if you're going to be at CloudWorld, you'll know where we're going to be and you can stop by and see us. All right, so let's get started. So my name is Kelly Smith, as I said. I have two other product managers with me here today, Alex and Dan. They'll be answering questions. Please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and we'll answer the questions as we're going along. Alex and Dan will stop me if there's a relevant question to the slides that I'm presenting, and we can answer some of those questions live. So we look forward to having your questions. So first, I'm going to do a quick overview of the Zero Data Loss Autonomous Recovery Service, and then we'll get right into the retention lock component that's coming up. The recovery service is based on the on-premises recovery appliance, which is an engineered system that's been around since about 2014. So we had quite a few years of practice, if you will, with on-premises database backup and recovery, and providing some of this enhanced functionality for protecting the Oracle database. And we've essentially just taken that on-premises engineered system and put it in the cloud. And we have a fleet of these things that are running in the cloud and provide our OCI database service customers this enhanced functionality. So in the cloud, you have your database services, autonomous database dedicated, Exadata database service, and base database service. We're doing incremental forever backups of those databases. We also have the capability to do zero data loss, as the name of the product says. And we do that via real-time protection. And I'll show you what some of those screens look like here in just a couple minutes. But it's all done through automation. So this process of connecting the database service to the recovery service is all done through automation. We use compression to make sure that we're saving as much as we can from a space perspective for you and your backups as they're stored in the cloud. And we keep everything encrypted through its entire life cycle. We don't want data to ever escape in some way in an unencrypted format. So everything that goes to the autonomous recovery service has to be encrypted before it even leaves the client. And the autonomous recovery service never has access to the encryption keys. The encryption keys stay with the protected database, and they're never stored with the backup. They're protected through the database automation so that we keep the keys and the backups completely separate from one another. And of course, we have, with end-to-end encryption, we also do validation to make sure that all the backups that we receive are complete and intact and readable, and they can recover the database for the entire retention period that's been specified in the policy. And that ensures that, you have security and you have recoverability. We're really focusing on recoverability of the backups. And we have the capability of looking inside backups to make sure that we have everything we need for recoverability. And if we don't, we'll start sending messages to you as the user, letting you know that something's not quite right with the backups, so that we can take actions from there. All this is done through control plane operational orchestration. So there's a control plane for the database services. There's a control plane for the recovery service. They talk to one another to do all the implementation for backups in the database service. So the RMAN configuration, the scheduled backups, the securing the communications from point A to point B, all that's done through the automation. So you don't have to worry about all those details, right? You just say, I want backups of my database, and we do all the work behind the scenes to make that happen. We just want to make that cloud simple. That's the whole idea with the cloud, right? It's got to be all simple, point and click, and then you just kind of monitor from there as the data is coming back. And the monitoring shows up in the UI, right? You've got your policy-based retention, your backup health, your storage utilization. We're bubbling all that information up in the UI. We're also integrated in the metrics explorer, so you can see the metrics that are associated with the backups in the native OCI metrics explorer, as well as alerting. You can set thresholds for alerts to be sent in various ways. And that's all built into OCI, and the recovery service is integrated in that, so you have the capability of turning on those features. And then if we look at the functionality for the recovery service, we've kind of put it in 3 different buckets. The first one is ransomware resiliency. Everyone's talking about ransomware these days, and really that's, this new feature that we're introducing is targeted toward that ransomware resiliency, right? So the first is fast, zero data loss recovery with optimized backups. We're doing a lot of, that incremental forever, and that real-time protection gives you that fast capability. As I mentioned before, everything's automated and mandatory from an encryption perspective because we don't want data theft to occur. And then if you've seen this presentation before, with the overview, I talked about safeguarding backups with an enforced 14-day minimum retention. And that's because just out of the box, the recovery service holds on to backups for 14 days. That's our minimum retention period for a policy. What we're introducing now is an enforced policy level database retention lock. So in the policy, and I'll show you this in a few minutes, there's another option. You set your retention, and then you can retention lock that data so that the backups stay protected for the period of time that you specify. Not, it's not a 14-day minimum. You set the retention period, and we just follow the retention period as you want it. Next, operational efficiency. So no more full backups, which, as databases grow, that full backup becomes very difficult to deal with. And we don't do that anymore. We do one full backup, and then we do incremental forever from that point on. So that eliminates a lot of overhead on the production database. It also makes your backup windows really short. And that's one of the things that we've been hearing from customers who've adopted the recovery service over and over is that, the backups that we're running for 3 days because I have to do this full once a week, that's gone. It's really, really short backups now. So it's much easier to manage from an operational perspective. And then, of course, with every backup, we're doing recovery validation. And this is automated. It's offloaded, so there's no impact on the production database. So we're doing it all the time. And then, of course, if we run into a problem, we either fix the problem ourselves through automation, or we throw an alert so that you can take actions accordingly to make sure that the database backups are good. And then finally, cloud simplicity. So as I mentioned, configuration is really, really quick. A few clicks in the UI, you're off and running. And then you're just reaping the benefits of the health statistics and metrics that are coming back to you in the dashboard. So you have a deep understanding of what's happening. There's a dashboard that shows all the databases in the compartment. So in one view, you see everything that's in the compartment, all the databases, how much space they're using, which policies they're using, if their backups are good, are the backups healthy, all in one view. And then, of course, because we're rolling up the backup consumption metrics, there's no surprises on your bill, right? You can see exactly what each database is consuming from a backup perspective. And if necessary, you could have some, business decisions from a database owner's perspective, like the retention they selected may be costing more than the database is actually worth for your business. So, we give you that capability, and we want to give you those insights. And as I mentioned before, you can set alarms on the metrics that are coming back so that if something falls outside of your SLAs, you can follow up on that and determine what's happened. Like maybe someone did maintenance on the database and forgot to turn the database back on, or maybe they made a configuration change that they shouldn't have made it, which made backups fail. There are a lot of things that DBAs can do behind the scenes that we want to protect you from. So now if we look at the policy configuration with this new setting, if you go into the policy settings for the recovery service, you'll see that there's this new section in the policy. So before we just had the name and the retention in the number of days you wanted configured. So this retention policy is called finance. And the retention was set for 26 days. Now I can enable a retention lock. I can set a schedule for that retention lock. So it doesn't have to happen immediately, right? I can tell the policy to enable this retention lock in the future, so that I can understand what's going to happen with the policy as I add databases to it. We also have a grace period for databases that are entering the protection policy. So if a DBA made a mistake and dropped a database in or assigned a database to a protection policy, it doesn't immediately take effect. We give you a 2-week grace period to understand what your consumption is going to be. And again, make a business decision of, is that database appropriate for the retention period that's set? Because once it's locked, you can't get rid of it. And once you enable that 26-day retention will be enforced. And when I say enforced, that means that no one can make the change. And we'll go through all the scenarios here in just a couple moments that we've protected against. And of course, on the backup configuration side, when the database is selecting a protection policy, you just select it from the dropdown. So in this particular case, we're configuring backups for this database, and the protection policy has been selected for the 26 days, which is what we saw on the previous screen. And that's going to lock that database. That policy is locked, as you saw previously. So that means that the backups that are created by this database will be locked as well. And before you saw these options for what happens after the database is terminated. And there was this option for a 72-hour delete. So if you have a locked retention policy, this essentially is going to get overridden, because the policy is going to dictate via that lock how long the retention period is going to be, not the database termination option. So if you set the database termination option to 72 hours, the policy is going to override that because you put a retention lock on the backups. Okay, and then going forward, so from a retention lock perspective, it prevents reduction. So that 26 days that I had set in my policy, if someone attempts to turn that down, they're going to get back a message that says that that's not allowed because the policy has been locked. It also prevents a database move to another policy, because that would be another way to circumvent the retention lock, is just move the database from one policy to another. And now you can manipulate the database backups however you want. But we don't allow that. The database, once it's locked, it'll be locked into that policy, so that backups can't be deleted. And as I mentioned, it enforces the retention setting from the policy. So even if you have a 72-hour terminate option selected for the database, the retention policy, because it's locked, is going to override that setting and ensure that the database backups stick around for the length of the policy setting. We do allow increases in the backup retention. So was it 26 days? And if you wanted to go up to 30 days, no problem. Just turn up the retention, save the changes, and we will increase the backup retention for the policy. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there's a 14-day grace period when the new database is introduced into the policy. And again, we do that because we don't want one of your DBAs to make a mistake, drop a database into a policy, and if it was immediately locked, then you have to deal with that database in that retention for that retention period. And that may not make business decisions. So you have 14 days to look at the database utilization, because we give you the estimates on how much space is going to be utilized, and then make a decision if that database doesn't need to be in that policy. That gives you an opportunity to move it out. And these restrictions apply to all users. So even a tenancy admin who's all powerful in your tenancy cannot override the retention lock once it's enabled. So that ensures that if a malicious user, gets access to one of your tenancy admin accounts, they cannot get rid of the backups because the backups are under the retention lock. So you don't have to worry about that, that being an attack vector, if you will, for malicious actions. So you'll see this appear in the UI. There'll also be an announcement, a CN, if you will, that will come out for this functionality in OCI, and you can start using it. You can create your new policies. You can set it on existing policies. That's up to you. But we want to give you the flexibility to use this retention lock however you want. And the reason the retention lock came around, of course, is because some of our larger environments where customers have hundreds of databases, these administrators were like, I can't chase down the retention for all these hundreds of databases. If someone makes a change in the policy to one or two databases, and I've got 400 to manage, I'm never going to find that one change. It's going to be difficult for me to recognize. This retention lock ensures that the database will stick to the policy that it was assigned to, and the databases will stick to the retention that was set. So you don't have to worry about trying to chase that down if something happens. That they stay assigned where they were originally assigned. They stay once the lock is enabled. Okay. And then of course, if the database is ever terminated for any reason, we're going to be retaining the backups according to that retention lock. And then these health metrics that are on the database dashboard are going to start changing because the database has been terminated. Because once the database has been terminated, the data loss exposure will immediately start to tick up. And then based on the database service, we have thresholds that automatically change the health of the backup so that the backup health will go from protected to warning to error. And these metrics are available in the Metrics Explorer so that you can set alarms on those. So for a particular compartment, you can set an alarm that watches the data loss exposure, for example, and if it becomes too high, it can start sending alerts out to people. And then, of course, you want, from a management perspective, you want to make sure that there's a separation of duty for alarms and metrics monitoring in your environment away from your databases, your database administration, so that you can make sure that the DBA who terminated the database doesn't go behind the scenes and disable your alarm. But again, there are status updates that come out for that as well. So just kind of giving everybody an overview, as I mentioned, this will show up in the OCI tenancy, in your OCI tenancy for your policy configurations, and you'll receive an update notice in OCI. This functionality is available in your tenancy. So now switching gears over to DatabaseWorld at CloudWorld. It is in Las Vegas, September 18th through the 21st. And we have multiple sessions. So, we're talking about recovery service today. We have a hands-on lab that is on Tuesday from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. I will be the moderator there, along with a couple of my other PM colleagues, and you can get hands-on experience with the recovery service. And we're going to take it through a few scenarios. We're going to take you through, point-in-time restores. We're going to take you through setting up monitoring and how alerting works, creating, I'll call it run now backups, or an ad hoc immediate backup, so that you get experience and hands-on with the recovery service and have us there to ask questions. Like when you're going through the UI, if you see something interesting that you want to ask about, or if you've got some experience that you want to share with us and talk about, interesting problems to solve in your environment, we'll be there for that in the hands-on lab. And then next we have a learning session where we'll go over the recovery service and how it's being used in customer scenarios. The recovery service was introduced at CloudWorld last year, so we've got a few months under our belt. We've got some customer experiences to share, and we can talk about how the recovery service is being used and how some of the functionality for the recovery service is being used with customers, and give you kind of an overview. So give you some ideas of how you could use it in your environment. Moving on to the recovery appliance. So as I mentioned earlier on, the zero data loss recovery appliance is the engineered system that runs the recovery service behind the scenes. And a lot of customers still, leverage this on-premises solution, this on-premises engineered system to protect their on-premises databases. So we'll go into, the ransomware capabilities that are inherent to the recovery appliance itself, which is also powering some of the features that are available in the recovery service. So you can get if you will, a look behind the scenes at how the engineered system itself works. That's on Thursday from 9 a.m. Until 9:45. And again, there'll be a few of us product managers around. You can ask questions and then connect, and we can talk about any kind of interesting scenarios that you have in your organization. And then finally, the backup and recovery solutions portfolio, which covers everything. It covers RMAN and the recovery appliance and the recovery service and Oracle Secure Backup, how they all work together from on-premises and in the cloud. We'll be talking about some customer scenarios around how they're leveraging that technology across all kinds of environments. Because of course, backup and recovery is kind of your fallback if something detrimental happens in your environment. So we'll talk about everything: database recovery, application recovery, and all different types of infrastructure components in OCI and how to protect them with these different solutions. That's on Wednesday, 8:30 to 9:15. And again, there'll be a few of us PMs around to the product managers can help you answer questions, and you can talk to us. And then finally, we have backup and recovery demos running in the CloudWorld Hub. So we have a dedicated area in the CloudWorld Hub, and that is every day. We'll have folks in the demo area that can bring up these different solutions, and we can work through scenarios and answer questions about all the different technologies that we have for backup and recovery. So we'll have RMAN there, and the recovery appliance, and the recovery service, and Oracle Secure Backup. There's a time period every day for that, so just check the program for the different times that the demo grounds are open in the CloudWorld Hub, and that's at the Venetian. So that's it from there. I didn't see any questions come across, so we'll just kind of open up the floor now for questions. I've added some additional resources here that you can go and look at. We have product demos for the recovery service, and we have the session catalog link that's from the Oracle website, so that you can go look at the different sessions that are available at CloudWorld. So any questions? Because that wraps up our planned content. Any questions that you have in general? Quiet crowd today. Oh. So there's a question about roadmap items. We don't typically talk about roadmap items during the office hours. The question was, and I'll just say the question specifically about XSCC. So we talk about OCI based backup and recovery solutions. So the databases that are living in OCI. Cloud@Customer is kind of an extension of that, and we are doing some work to make the recovery service available in XSCC, which is our Cloud@Customer offering. So you'll see that in the future for sure. That's a path we're going to go down We can't talk specifically about timelines, though. Any other questions? So there's another question, and this is a good one. So the question, this is obviously someone who's familiar with the recovery appliance, and the question is, how does the retention lock differ from the RA compliance retention? So there are some differences. One of the big differences, if you look at compliance retention, and you look at what's required from a recovery appliance perspective, we're trying to protect the backups in two different ways, because the end user has direct access to the recovery appliance, right? The recovery appliance being an on-premises engineered system, there are some underlying locks that we had to put in place to make sure that a user who's just an administrator in the environment on premises, that the customer can't go in and delete stuff from behind the scenes. And we already have those safeguards in place in the cloud. So we run in that mode because we don't want backups to just arbitrarily be deleted by any of the operations team members by accident. So the retention lock that we have through the recovery service is pure customer facing, right? Because the customers that are using the recovery service don't have access to any of the underlying infrastructure. So there's a difference in the implementation because of that hard separation. In the cloud, if we've got the engineered systems already locked down and safe and in a separate Oracle managed tenancy that's completely separate from the DBAs that are using the system every day. On premises, that can get a little fuzzy. You can have situations where the DBA may have a little more physical access to the infrastructure, being able to log in at an OS prompt, if you will. So we had to put additional safeguards. So same concept, but different implementation because we're working on different levels. From a pure end user perspective where the infrastructure is completely locked away versus with the on-premises recovery appliance where everything can be a little bit more commingled, where you have physical access, you have potentially administrative access to the hardware infrastructure. So, want to keep those two things completely separate. And so there is a slightly different implementation because we're dealing with a cloud interface, cloud REST interface, if you will, in the recovery service. But same functionality overall, just slightly different implementation because of the interaction that happens with the cloud and a REST API. Okay, any other questions? All right. Well, I think thank you to everyone who joined us on this, Friday. Hopefully everyone's going to have a good rest of the day and a wonderful weekend. As always, if you have any suggestions about topics that we should cover for backup and recovery, you can post those on the Ask Tom website. And we'll be more than happy to, set an agenda based on your question. We're always looking for ways to highlight interesting customer use cases and interesting customer questions with the solutions that we provide here at Oracle. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great weekend.